Well, hello everyone. My name is Chris Estefanos, and I'm very happy to be with you guys. I don't know how many more times I could say very, but welcome to the Reintroduction Podcast. A lot of you are probably asking, why do we have three strapping gentlemen on this screen right now? I got Dr. Mina Sawiris, I got Dr. Mina Murham here with me. But before we get into introductions, I want to just give you guys a little bit of a background of what is this podcast, what is it about, and why we're doing it. So about 2 years ago, I put a question on Facebook about if you had an opportunity to have dinner with God, what questions would you ask him? And that led into a really interesting thread of questions that people asked. And basically, I've been meaning to launch this with these amazing gentlemen for 2 years now, and COVID-19 has allowed us to do it. So thank you, gentlemen, for getting on this Zoom call with me in order for us to be able to really hit the ground running with the reintroduction.
Word up.
My man,
Good to have you guys.
good to be here. You're lucky we're quarantined.
You know, I wouldn't be able to get you guys locked down on a Zoom call if it wasn't for quarantine. So some good comes out of it.
How our schedule is, everybody, we're so busy all day, every day.
Very, we're so important.
So tell me a little bit about you guys. Who are you? Let's start with Mina Murham.
Me, okay, so I'm one of the millions of Minas in this world. I am a shrink by profession, meaning I'm a psychiatrist. So what I do is I hear people tell me about their lives most of the day, which is fun in a lot of ways. So that's in terms of what I do for my day job, but my passion and stuff is this kind of thing, the church and how we understand God and how we live with him and what we know about him that's true or false or otherwise. I'm also a big time Knicks fan, and I have nothing to watch right now, so this is the next best thing for us is to just at least do this podcast. So
I feel you, man.
that's me right there.
Mina Sawiris.
So both of you have people laying on tables all day long.
All day, bro. Lay back. Tell me about your mom.
Chris as a physical therapist and you as the shrink. Well, I've got people kind of laying on a table too. It's a chair that's kind of like inclined. But they don't get to tell me more about their problems. I get to tell them more about, my problems. They can't speak much when they're sitting in the chair.
Mina, speaking of profession, before you even get into your profession, you have to showcase the T-shirt that you're wearing right now.
Thank you. So I will promise you that hopefully, as long as we can keep this going, every time I'm going to show you an exciting T-shirt. Okay.
Wow.
So today you have to be ready for this.
Adidas.
I got a logo of a tooth and the Adidas logo, and it says Adidas instead of Adidas.
Love it. I love it.
Thank you, man. It's an honor to be here. Honestly, I think the list of questions, Chris, are unbelievable. It's something that we've thought about at some point in our lives. Some of these questions we've reconciled, some of them we haven't, and some that we've reconciled and we keep going back to them when our circumstances change. What was it like for you when you started collecting them?
It's really interesting because this started as I was having a bunch of conversations with people. And every time I'd have a conversation with somebody, whether it was on my physical therapy table or whether it was just a phone call, people come back to the same issues. Why am I suffering? Why is there pain? Why is there evil in the world? Why blah, blah, blah. And not to undermine these questions, but the reality is these questions are very centered around a lot of people's misunderstanding of who God is and who we are. So that's what kind of sparked that Facebook survey that I took, because I was getting sort of tired of hearing these same sort of questions and never giving people a place to point to in terms of hey, go check this out or listen to this or do this. So that's why I was hoping to launch this platform for us to be able to have these conversations in a real relatable fashion, for people to be able to plug into and listen to. So I'm glad that I have you amazing gentlemen on here, because I think you are the perfect two folks between a dentist and a psychiatrist to also be able to answer these issues because you've heard it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Sorry, Mina.
Go
I just
ahead.
wanted something about your status real quick, Chris, because I was rereading it, from a while ago, and maybe one of the things that's frustrating too is like besides the questions themselves, is like one person who commented was like the answers are like obvious, like you should. I'm sure they've answered for you already in the church, and then the person responded again and was like, "What are those obvious questions?" And then there was no response. Like that person was just left hanging, right? It was and I feel like that's one of the frustrating things now is that people will either have a frustrating question, put it out there, and then either get no answer or figure, okay, so my lack of an answer is the answer. Like why does God do things that make no sense? Is because God makes no sense. So that's why.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's from like our own understanding, being like the beings that we are, with our limits and our desire to know more, and to try to bridge that gap. Which takes me to the point of, so, who is this for? Who should be listening to this, guys?
For me, I think everybody should be listening to this. But if you are angry with God, if you have rejected Him, if you are a person that's just a little bit confused about the nature of who God is, come check this out. I think this will be the perfect, sort of conversation to listen into because I'm hoping it'll be relatable.
Yeah, I think the three of us, we are average Joes, but we offer something a little bit unique. I think the fact that um, we're not theologians, we're just average people.
Speak for
We,
yourself.
well, it's true.
For the beard. The
Forgive me.
beard is
The beard
years
gives
of
you
monastic
legitimacy,
experience right
for
there.
sure. Yeah, I think we're not experts on the subject matters. I think we are overwhelmed at times with these questions, just like everybody else. That the edge that we have is that we've been positioned in the church throughout service. We've done service overseas. We've done service locally here in the churches, given some talks, talked to some youth, had our own share of experiences and like ups and downs. And it's kind of put us in a position that we've had access to like thinkers, we've had access to theologians, to bishops, to clergy, to your average simple like old grandpa and grandma at church with their simplicity of faith. We can kind of combine all of this together and be able to have our listeners and our viewers and ourselves as well put our hands on like the first like part of that string of getting to know God a little bit more and getting to know God how he truly is through the perspective of everyone combined, not just through an individual perspective, not just from the eyes of the theologian, but from the eyes of the simple man who knows nothing about theology, and not just from the thinker, but the one who just wants a matter of fact and doesn't need to worry about logic and things like that. And with the connections that we know and the experts that we can hope to speak with and bring them into our conversations, I mean, um, it would be good to be able to kind of present this not as a one-stop answer to all of your questions you've ever wondered about God, but this is a place where you can put your hands on the first part of the road so we can discuss together. I'm sure we've all heard answers given about all these topics a million times, but it's good to have it in a flow of a conversation from professional perspectives that we've had, personal perspectives, and from our service perspective as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think so. My hope is that the title is called the reintroduction. I'm hoping that God through us will allow himself to be reintroduced to many people. So if you've rejected him or you're angry with him, give him a shot, give him an opportunity. And I think like you said, Mina, we have as a three of us combined, we have a unique experience, and we're hoping to be able to share that with our listeners. So let's dive right into the first question. So around the topic of misconceptions, gentlemen, um, if you guys care to share a misconception that you may have had about God growing up and how that shaped your relationship with him. So I'll start with you, Murham. Talk to me a little bit about that for you.
Sure. I think I had a lot of misconceptions about God growing up. I mean, I couldn't even pick like my top 10 like worst. Like I've heard so many dumb things about him, and I figured those dumb things were the real things because that's all I got. But I would say maybe the biggest one, if I had to put it into a headline, was like that God is only for certain people. And what I mean by that is that like God is about like a personality type, you know? So I have my own personality. I'm like eccentric and loud and annoying, and like God is not about people like me. You know, like if you're gonna be real Christian, and be pious and quiet and like, you know, just humble, like, you know, spiritual things that I'm not. So I always felt like God is, I have no place in church, and I have no place in God too. So when I saw that, it wasn't something that attracted me to be like, oh man, like there's room for me too. There's room for the way I look or the way I think. Not that I was like, you know, that out there, I guess, as far as, you know, our people go, but there was something about it that seemed like it was very cookie cutter ish when I was growing up.
Mm. It looked different,
Yeah.
and we're not sure if that look is accepted all the time or not. I remember a story, and it kind of shaped a lot of my perspective on this very point, Mina, that Merham, that you brought up. I think we're gonna have to get used to calling each other by last name. It's gonna be really hard. Mina and Mina.
Optic problems, man.
Mina with an I, Mina with an E. That doesn't resolve it.
Who would have thought we'd have two Minas on
I
one
know,
call?
I know.
Yeah.
But I remember one time walking into church late. We had something the night before at a competition. We came late at like 10 or 11, just towards the end of liturgy. And I remember Abuna Dumadius at St. Mark's. He was coming from the kids' liturgy, and he was walking into the main liturgy to help out with communion at the end. And I was standing in the back of the church, and next to me was a guy that was like all tatted up, had piercings, had looked like he didn't belong for sure, especially with everything that our perceptions as a culture. And you know, the usual people giving him the looks that you get sometimes. And I remember Abuna Dumadis walking in and having the biggest smile on his face, gave the guy a big hug when he didn't know him. I asked him later. And then he just went back up to help out with communion as if it was like, and I remember thinking to myself, had that happened in other churches, I can't know for certain that the same reaction would have happened. Maybe people would not have welcomed him the same way. So that broad understanding of God and how He looks at us differently than we look at ourselves and we look at each other, and it's a huge misconception that I've grown up with as well.
And I think because of that, sorry, Chris, but I think because of that story and because of that kind of idea, I think if like there's a hope that I have in terms of who's going to catch this podcast besides like my mom, is anyone who feels like they don't belong. Someone who feels like, you know what, like I wouldn't be the kind of person, like if they felt like I did, or maybe they felt like that kid who was tatted up. Because I think that like one of the worst things to feel as a person, just not even as a, I'm not telling you as a shrink, but like as a human, is to feel like an outcast, to feel like you don't belong. It feels like you
Mm.
don't have, you're not part of the fold. And to know that there's this big discrepancy there is that God wants us to belong, but we still feel for 100 reasons that God is like pushing us away or giving us a side eye. I hope this podcast, if one of the things comes out of it by the end, that someone who feels like an outcaster can listen to us three geniuses and feel like less of an outcast. I think that would be a miracle.
Chris, what
Yeah,
do you think?
yeah, no, I think that's totally the reality of many's experience with God. Like, you know, whether they've been to church communities and have felt outcasted or didn't feel like they looked a certain way or spoke a certain way or acted a certain way. Um, and I think that's why so many people, when they talk about their experience with church, a lot of times the first thing that they say is the church was filled with a bunch of hypocrites,
Yeah.
you know?
Mm.
And and I think that that misconception that people have about church people and projecting that on God, or the reality that they have with those church people and projecting that on God, often paints God in a negative light, you know? Um, I mean, my experience, Mina, was very similar to yours. I think in a lot of ways that I thought that I had to look a certain way or act a certain way. But my issue was I thought that God was an angry, vindictive God. So I was afraid of him. I thought that I had to be a certain way in terms of like my level of holiness, so to speak, in order to be able to approach him. And I think that stems from my childhood. My parents were amazing people. I got to give them a shout out, you know, but
Bulbul Tanzizi.
give them a shout out. But my mom, as any amazing mom wanting to instill a little bit of the fear of God into their child, instilled this idea that if I did a certain amount of things, Jesus would be mad at me. So I thought when I was living in sin that Jesus was mad at me. And it made me afraid to approach him because I felt like if I approached him, there may be like a lightning bolt that would come strike me. So that was kind of my misconception around God. And until I met him in a real way through understanding that he loves me the same in my deepest and darkest sin as in my greatest act of righteousness, that was paramount. It basically transcended anything that I'd ever heard about God and set me on a very different trajectory moving forward in life.
Let me just ask something, Chris. I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying correctly. So you're saying, what do you mean by that? If you sinned, that God isn't mad at you?
Yeah.
Like sin? What do you mean? What are you trying to say?
No, I mean, I think this idea that God's love for me depends on me. Um, and I think that's a huge misconception that a lot of people have about God, is that God changes, that he flip-flops based upon how we are acting. So if I am good, he's like all joyful. And if I'm bad, he's like, you are so bad and I don't like you. And um, but yeah, he's the same yesterday, today, and
Like
tomorrow.
Zeus in the sky.
Yeah, yeah. So that's, that reality changed kind of how I lived and how I approached God. And I'm sure many of our listeners probably have heard that before or feel that way at this moment.
Yeah, I think there's something else that you pointed at or that you touched on that I think is important. You even corrected yourself, like when you like said it, right? Like there is the misconception that we have about who God is, and then there is not a misconception to the experiences that we've had about church. There is like reality, right? Like you said it well, I think too, is that like there is a negative reality that sometimes we've had about church people. And I think it's important for us as like church-ish people to make no excuses about that. That we make no apology, like maybe we need to make an apology, but not an excuse. Is the fact that like people that I know, and maybe you guys have had those experiences too, who have been hurt by church people, like that's a real thing that happened, and they were really hurt by someone in the church who is spiritual, who looked at them the wrong way or said the wrong thing or threw something at them or whatever, right? And oftentimes like that's not a reason necessarily or a good reason to extrapolate that to God. But I think we got to put that out there. We got to clear the air of like, yes, sometimes people have had terrible, experiences or terrible interactions with Christians, and that shaped who they view God as. But you made a beautiful distinction, I think, between the reality of that experience versus the misinterpretation or extrapolating it to who God is. I thought that was a really important thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think looking at God as a father or a friend or a foe, a lot of times stems from how we have experienced him through others and not just how we've experienced him through himself. A lot of it has to do, it's hard to say, look to God as a father if your earthly father, fell short of your expectations, or if your friends constantly betrayed you, or you feel like you've been wronged so many times and God did not intercede for you, he wasn't there for you, that now he's become a foe. So these misconceptions, whether they're dictated by our circumstances or dictated by people's actions excuse me, towards us, leaves us hanging.
Coronavirus. Oh, I think the session's over. Glory be to God forever.
But we have to learn to cough on our shoulders.
That's right.
Even when I'm quarantined by myself.
Thank God this
Which takes me to the point, guys, I really miss handshakes and I miss hugs.
Oh, me
I
too.
know, really, man.
Like
It's been
special
rough.
occasions, the type that are like,
Yeah, yeah.
those are gone.
You know, I really think I think the misconceptions that we have about God are often stemming from our own experiences with others,
Yeah.
right? So what I'm hearing from you both is that what I think about God often is related to my experience with my hurts with others, what people have said to me, whether in church or outside of church, whether it be, just past experiences of hardships. If, like, I lost a loved one when I was younger. I
Mhm.
think if I don't have an understanding of who God is, I think that God is angry with me and he stole my loved one away from me. And I can't approach him as a father, like Mina was saying. I can't approach him as a friend. So I do approach him as a foe.
It's true, but in addition to that, though, here's I think the annoying thing that we can do as church people is we can be so easy to be like, no, 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 God's not like that. God's a loving father, and like just dismiss the fact that like this is a real thing. When somebody has this, like we have a saying in the little shrink world, right? Like someone could behave a certain way, and we have to assume like I'm sure you have a reason to feel this way. Like if you felt this hurt or you lost a loved one when you were young, there is real pain there. And that pain doesn't go away by us sprinkling a little Christianese on top and saying, no, 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 but God's not like that. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes we don't do a great job and of like like admitting and facing the hurt of that moment and then reorienting the view about God, right?
Mhm.
Because if we go too quickly, even in this misconception conversation, and like dismiss that feeling, dismiss that experience, or like not really give it weight, then we sort of invalidate it, I guess is what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Does
Yeah,
that make
no, no.
sense?
I feel you. And I think that's the first disclaimer, so to speak, that we
Yeah.
need to say
Mm.
is that anything that you've experienced as a listener or as a person who's watching is real and it stinks. And we don't want to dismiss that. We want to encounter that and, really just talk about it in a way that, we can try to bring healing to it.
Yeah.
We're not going to bring healing, but we're praying that we could connect you to the person who is the healer of all experiences. And they're real and they stink. And, we can't just put a cherry on top and add a chocolate fudge sundae and say, oh, you forget about your experience. So I totally agree with you, Mina. That's a super valid point.
Mm. And I love that. And I think to kind of build on it, when we sometimes also as churchgoers or people who have grown up in church all of our lives, we we let our awe of God kind of replace or take over God being tangible and present.
Mm.
We use a lot of big words, a lot of big terms that help us understand how amazing and big and huge and up in the sky and in control God is. And for some people, that leads them to forget that he's actually, as much as he is up there and in control, he's also here right next to you.
Right.
And he's also feeling every pain and everything. So as a culture, as much as we stress the big, immeasurable, like attributes of God, we also have to stress the small things, the tangible things, that his presence here with us in everything that we do.
So besides Mina Murham, you thinking about God as him, you having to look a certain way or act a certain way, or me thinking of God as an angry, vindictive God. Mina Sawiris, what about you? Anything that you or misconceptions that you had about him?
Yeah, it ties into both what you guys have said, and it's the transactional aspect. Is that God works with me on a transaction basis, which meant to me that when I need to win His favor, I can be on my best behavior. The misinterpretation of the verse that says, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you." Like the misinterpretation of that is, okay, He's there when I need Him. I'll get on my best behavior and I'll win Him back. Even though the church never taught that, a part of me absorbed that from the culture, you know, and not to beat on anybody or anything that we do, but like for example, that we do is like the idea of making monetary vows to specific saints for certain things that need to happen. Not that we don't need to do that, but the way we approach it
Cash money, baby.
sometimes has a little bit, yeah, sometimes has a little bit of flaws. It's as if, like, you know what, God, I really need this new job, and if I get it, I'm going to pay $1,000 to St. Mina's church. And the idea in my head is like God is sitting in his office and is doing nothing, and like he's about to stamp on me not getting the job, and St. Mina runs in last minute, be like, whoa, hold up, did you not hear that Mina Suarez just vowed $1,000 to my church? If you give it to him, can you please give it to him? And that's like our understanding of vows, of how things work in the sky and in heaven. And it kind of defeats the purpose, and it makes our relationship and how we deal with God transactional. So if he's dealing with me in a transactional way, it also must mean that I can deal with him back also in a transactional way. If, like you said, Chris, if his love to me is bound by my actions and and the things that I do, then that also means that when I change, he accepts, and when I don't, he doesn't. But we tread a very fine line here between, okay, so why don't I just sin all the time? And why can't I just be on my bad behavior all the time, you know? So it kind of feeds into that second question of, okay, what happens then when you saw that the misconception was when you realized that that misconception was there? How did you correct it, or how did it make your understanding of God different?
Yeah, I think for me, I think the first time I heard about the love of God and the grace of God, that was like, and I literally remember it. Like, I was sitting on Lake Victoria in Tanzania, and it was a Bible study given on the prodigal son, and I had never in my life heard the passage and the love of God being spoken about in that way. It was 2007, and I think when I understood the love of God to be so real and to be so present and to be so forgiving,
Mm,
it just it really, I can't explain, but it really just changed the way that I approached God. It was almost like there were scales that dropped from my eyes, and not to sound so weird about it, but it was really almost like, wow, everything that I thought about you was so wrong,
Mm.
because you aren't angry, you aren't vindictive, you're actually just waiting for me as a loving father that just wants to have a relationship with me. And I don't know about for you guys, but that really is the pinnacle for me of my relationship with God. Is anytime I'm on a wrong sort of trajectory, that's what reorients me back. You know, that relationship, that moment, that experience that I encountered with God.
Mm.
mm,
That's powerful, man. Because the I guess as much as we're saying that there are these negative experiences that can cloud and distort and like really dump all over our image of God, like thank God that there are these other moments of clarity, like these moments of like where the scales are off, like you're saying, and then like God, you see him finally as he is, right? Like we're recording this as a time of like upcoming, Pascha's coming up, and I remember like one of the church fathers talk about the fact of like Christ ascending to the cross naked, so you can really see the fullness of the love of God bare, like right in front of you. You want to really understand God, you want to understand the fullness of everything. It's not some guy in the sky. It's Christ on that wood. So, and for me, it was sort of similar too, of like where for the first time it wasn't about like something I had read or seen or heard, if somebody told me something, it was like the person of Jesus was who he was. Like this is it in terms of everything I need to know about him, or what that implies about my life or whatever. It was just me and him. And I think when it was me and him, that was a game changer.
Mm.
It was not like the court of law, like what the lawyers say, like hearsay. It wasn't what somebody told me. It was just me experiencing him, and then therefore after that being able to experience his church, like him in the community of the believers. And that was a big difference for me. And I'll be honest with you, I'll just kind of confess it here for whoever's going to hear it. I sort of had a mixed feeling between like joy and anger, like the joy of like, wow, God is awesome, and the anger of like, whoa, I got played for a long time.
Mm.
And that's part of the way I feel about this podcast. Like, there's a joy of excitement of like, man, I hope somebody here feels the, God, experiences God in some real way. And I'm angry, and I'm kind of like, like, man, people are getting hustled. People are out here getting like, just like one of the 3-card shuffle. Like, oh, you think this is God? Nope, God moved. That's not God.
God changed.
Yeah,
Yeah, like the God of the Old Testament and God of the New Testament.
yeah. Someone literally just asked me that yesterday.
Mm. Yeah. And that's important. And if you're listening to us and you're having all these like questions, oh, what about, like as Chris was saying, vengeance and wrath? Okay, what about like the verse of the Old Testament? What about what happened in the Old Testament? That's why I want you to tune into this, because that's what we're going to be talking about, like in the episodes to come, and taking these ideas and understanding them a little bit better. And again, like not resolving and providing like the most like big answers, but like it's good to be able to talk about it, put our hands on the beginning of the road and go from there. And Chris, what I'm hearing you and Mina also say is that it's important to put always remember your thin places, the places where you've experienced God in a way that was so undoubted and raw, and you can always refer back to it as your point of reference. And then once you've realized and tasted who He truly is, to keep going back to it.
Yeah, and I think I'm not going to try to make it out to be like there was this moment and then, my life was forever changed and I never looked back.
Mm,
It's been a journey. There are highs and lows, there are hills and valleys, there are ups and downs. And I think that's the beauty of having a real relationship with God that's based on love, not based on fear. Because when I'm in that valley and when I am down and when I am far, what brings me back to Him is the love, is that relationship that I know is based on truth, not based on what I'm projecting onto Him.
mm,
And I think, I read one time a quote from St. Gregory that said, from our own actions, we give name and actions to God.
mm,
We, from our own actions, we're projecting onto God. So if, Mina, you hurt me, it's expected that I be angry with you. It's expected that I be, frustrated or turn my face from you. Uh, but that's not God.
It's a similar quote that I heard from Saint Bono of U2. In a concert once, he was saying how like we tend to recreate God in our own image. Like,
mm,
we look at ourselves and we create Him the way we behave, just like you're saying. I mean, Saint Gregory might have put it in a little bit of a fancier way, but it's true. The way we recreate God that way, and that's why one of the things I think that I've appreciated throughout the years, like you guys are saying, the journey of faith has been not always so much about like the answers that have come my way, but sometimes the questions that have come, like from people like you guys, from like friends of ours, right? Like, so part of the hope that I feel like in our conversations too is that not necessarily that we're going to give people the grand answers. They're like, here, come to our reintroduction and we've got it all figured out, like you guys are saying. But I think maybe we can probe a little bit to have people ask some good questions. And I think when we can do that, like God can handle the answers a little bit more. Um, but I think that's part of a growing faith journey too, is questions.
Yeah. And I think for any of our listeners, I think what we want to sort of express to you as best as we possibly can is that this is, if you are angry, if you have any hurts, if you have any experience with God that have jaded your image of Him, tune in. We are eager and we're excited to have conversations around things that are difficult, around, experiences and issues that many people have had. And one of the things that we're hoping to plug into next week on the episode that's coming up is about coronavirus. You know,
mhm, mhm.
coronavirus.
Can I pray the coronavirus away?
It's a good question, Mina. Can we pray the coronavirus away? Is God angry with us and that's why coronavirus is here? Why is there disease in the world? Where did it come from? These are questions that I don't know if we're going to answer in one episode, but they're in
China. There, I fixed it. Episode
Chinese virus.
China.
Um, but yeah, I mean, thank you guys for sharing your experiences and being open and vulnerable and kind of talking about your journey with God. And, again, if you are a listener, we encourage you to think about some of your own misconceptions about God, some of the things that have, hurt you or jaded your experience with him, and tune in to give him an opportunity to reintroduce himself to you. So, without further ado, thank you guys for being with me and being with us. And we look forward to having you on many more weeks of the Reintroduction podcast.
It's a pleasure. Don't forget to unsubscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. Actually, don't
Subscribe. Don't forget.
unsubscribe. Find us on
First episode, they're gonna unsubscribe, man.
Find us where you find the podcasts.
Find us on Instagram, on YouTube. We're going to be posting them on Apple Podcasts. So everything will be released, and we'll be making sure that we get everything out to everybody in the right time. So,
but first, a word from our sponsors. Just kidding. We don't have any sponsors.
We don't got any sponsors. If you want to sponsor us, write the check. Write the check. We need better equipment to produce this. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Love you guys. See you next time.